Speaking from 21 South Street.
Reading to all of these Ruskin-Bond stories sometimes make me feel that I might have also visited Dehradun, maybe more than once. The faint queasiness I always feel towards the end of a journey probably has its origin in that first homecoming after my father's death. It was the winter of 1944. Yes, a long time ago, and the train was running through the thick sal forests near Dehra, bringing me at every click of the rails nearer to the mother I hadn't seen for 4 years, and the stepfather I had seen just once or twice before my parents were divorced. I was 11, and I was coming home to Dehra. 3 years earlier, after the separation, I had gone to live with my father. We were very happy together. He was serving in the RAF at New Delhi, and we lived in a large tent somewhere near Humayun's tomb. The area is now a very busy part of urban Delhi, but in those days, it was still a wilderness of scrub jungle where black buck and nilgai roamed freely. We took long walks together, exploring the ruins of old tombs and forts, went to the pictures, collected stamps, bought books, and made plans for going to England when the war was over. 6 months of bliss, even though it was summer and there weren't any fans, only a thick khas reed curtain which had to be splashed with water every hour by a bhisti who did the rounds of similar tents with his goatskin water bag. I remember the tender, refreshing fragrance of the khas and also the smell of damp earth outside. A happy time. But it had to end. My father's periodic bouts of malarial fever resulted in him having to enter hospital for a week. The bhisti's small son came to stay with me at night, and during the day I took my meals with an Anglo-Indian family across the road. I would have been quite happy to continue with this arrangement whenever my father was absent, but someone at Air Headquarters must have advised him to put me in a boarding school. Reluctantly, he came to the decision that this would be the best thing until the war is over, and in the June of 1943, he took me to Shimla, where I was reincarcerated in a preparatory school for boys. This is not the story of my life at boarding school. It might easily have been a public school in England. It did, in fact, pride itself on being the Eton of the East. The traditions such as ragging and flogging, compulsory games and chapel attendance, prefects larger than life, and honors boards for everything from school captaincy to choir membership had all apparently been borrowed from Tom Brown's school days. My father wrote to me regularly, and his letters were the things I looked forward to more than anything else. I went to him for the winter holidays, and the following summer he came to Shimla during my midterm break and took me out for the duration of the holidays. We stayed in a hotel called Craigdhu on a spur north of the Jacko Hill. It was an idyllic week. Long walks, stories about phantom rickshaws, ice creams in the sun, browsings in bookshop, and more plans. We'll go to England next year. School seemed a stupid and heartless place after my father had gone away. He had been transferred to Calcutta and he wasn't keeping well there. Malaria again, and then jaundice. But his last letter sounded quite cheerful. He had been selling part of his valuable stamp collection so as to have enough money for the fares to England. One day, my class teacher sent for me. "I want to talk to you, Bond," he said. "Let's go for a walk." I knew immediately that something was wrong. We took the path that went through the deodar forest, past Council Rock where scout meetings were held. As soon as my unfortunate teacher started on the theme of God wanting your father in a higher and better place, as though there could be any better place than Jacko Hill in midsummer, I knew my father was dead and burst into tears. They let me stay in the school hospital for a few days until I felt better. The headmaster visited me there and took away the pile of father's letters that I had kept beside me. "Your father's letters? You might lose them. Why not leave them with me? Then at the end of the year, before you go home, you can come and collect them." Unwillingly, I gave him the letters. He told me that he had heard from my mother and I would be going home to her at the end of the year. He seemed surprised that I evinced no interest in this prospect. At the end of the year, the day before school closed, I went to the headmaster's office and asked for my letters. "What letters?" he asked. His desk was piled with papers and correspondence, and he was irritated by my interruption. "My father's letters?" I explained. "I gave them to you to keep for me, sir, when he died." "Letters? Are you sure you gave them to me?" He grew more irritated. "You must be mistaken, Bond. Why should I want to keep your father's letters?" "I don't know, sir. You said I could collect them before going home." "Look, I don't remember any letters and I'm very busy just now. I'm sure you're mistaken, but if I find your letters, I'll send them to you." I don't suppose he meant to be unkind, but he was the first man who aroused in me feelings of hate. As the train drew into Dehra, I looked out of the window to see if there was anyone on the platform waiting to receive me. The station was crowded enough, as most railway stations are in India, with overloaded travelers, shouting coolies, stray dogs, stray station masters. Pandemonium broke loose as the train came to a halt and people disembarked from the carriages. I was thrust on the platform with my tin trunk and small attaché case. I sat on the trunk and waited for someone to find me. Slowly the crowd melted away. I was left with one elderly coolie who was too feeble to carry the heavy luggage and had decided that my trunk was just the right size and weight for his head and shoulders. I waited for another 10 minutes. But no representative of my mother or stepfather appeared. I permitted the coolie to lead me out of the station to the Tonga stand. Those were the days when everyone, including high-rank officials, went about in Tongas. Dehra had just one taxi. I was quite happy sitting beside a rather smelly, pan-spitting Tonga driver while his weary, underfed pony clip-clopped along the quiet, tree-lined roads. Dehra was always a good place for trees. The valley soil is very fertile, the rainfall fairly heavy. Almost everything grows there, if given the chance. The roads were lined with neem and mango trees, eucalyptus, Persian lilac, jacaranda, and many others. In the gardens of the bungalows were mangoes, lychee, guavas, sometimes jackfruit and papaya. I did not notice all these trees at once. I came to know them as time passed. The Tonga first took me to my grandmother's house. I was under the impression that my mother still lived there. A lovely, comfortable bungalow that spread itself about the grounds in an easy-going, old-fashioned way. There was even smoke coming out from the chimneys, reminding me of the smoke from my grandfather's pipe. When I was 8, I had spent several months there with my grandparents. In retrospect, it had been an idyllic interlude. But grandfather was dead. Grandmother lived alone. White-haired, but still broad in the face and even broader behind, she was astonished to see me getting down from the tonga. "Didn't anyone meet you at the station?" she asked. I shook my head. Grandmother said, "Your mother doesn't live here anymore. You can come in and wait. But she may be worried about you, so I would better take you to her place. Come on, help me up into the tonga." I might have known it would be a white horse. It always makes me nervous sitting in a tonga behind a white horse. "Why, Granny?" I don't know. I suppose white horses are nervous too. Anyway, they're always trying to topple me out. "Not so fast, driver," she called out, as the tonga man cracked his whip and the pony changed from a slow shuffle into a brisk trot. It took us about 25 minutes to reach my stepfather's house, which was in the Dalanwala area not far from the dry bed of the seasonal Rispana River. My grandmother, seeing that I was in need of moral support, got down with me, while the tonga driver carried my bedding roll and tin trunk onto the veranda. The front door was bolted from inside. We had to go knock it on repeatedly and call out before it was opened by a servant who did not look pleased at being disturbed. When he saw my grandmother, he gave her a deferential salam, then gazed at me with open curiosity. "Where's the Mem Sahib?" asked grandmother. "Out," said the servant. "I can see that, but where have they gone?" "They went yesterday to Motichur for shikar. They will be back this evening." Grandmother looked upset, but motioned to the servant to bring in my things. "Weren't they expecting the boy?" she asked. Yes," he said, looking at me again, "but they said he would be arriving tomorrow." "They had forgotten the date," said grandmother in a huff. "Anyway, you can unpack and have a wash and change your clothes." Turning to the servant, she asked, "Is there any lunch?" "I will make lunch," he said. He was staring at me again, and I felt uneasy with his eyes on me. He was tall and swarthy, with oily jet black hair and a thick moustache. A heavy scar ran down his left cheek, giving him a rather sinister appearance. He wore a torn shirt and dirty pajamas. His broad, heavy feet were wet. They left marks on the uncarpeted floor. A baby was crying in the next room, and presently a woman appeared in the doorway, jogging the child in her arms. "They've left the baby behind too," said grandmother, becoming more and more irate. "He's your younger brother, only 6 months old." I hadn't been told anything about a younger brother. The discovery that I had one came as something of a shock. I wasn't prepared for a baby brother, least of all a baby half-brother. I examined the child without much enthusiasm. He looked healthy enough and he cried with gusto. "He's a beautiful baby," said grandmother. "Well, I've got work to do. The servants will look after you. You can come and see me in a day or two. You have grown since I last saw you, and you're getting pimples." This reference to my appearance did not displease me, as grandmother never indulged in praise. For her to have observed my pimples indicated that she was fond of me. The tonga driver was waiting for her. "I suppose I'll have to use the same tonga," she said, Whenever I need a Tonga, they disappear, except for the ones with white ponies. When your mother gets back, tell her I want to see her. Shikar, indeed. An infant to look after, and they have gone shooting. Grandmother settled herself in the Tonga, nodded in response to the cook's salam, and took a tight grip of the armrests of a seat. The driver flourished his whip, and the pony set off at the same listless, unhurried trot, while my grandmother, feeling quite certain that she was going to be hurtled to her doom by a wild white pony, set her teeth and clung tenaciously onto the Tonga seat. I was sorry to see her go. My mother and stepfather returned in the evening from their hunting trip with a pheasant, which was duly handed over to the cook, whose name was Mangal Singh. My mother gave me a perfunctory kiss. I think she was pleased to see me, but I was accustomed to a more intimate care from my father, and the strange reception I had received made me realize the extent of my loss. Boarding school life had been routine. Going home was something I had always looked forward to. But going home had meant my father, and now he had vanished and I was left quite desolate. I suppose if one is present when a loved one dies or sees him dead and laid out and later buried, one is convinced of the finality of the thing and finds it easier to adapt to the changed circumstances. But when you hear of a death, a father's death, and only have the faintest idea of the manner of his dying, it is rather a lot of imagination to cope up with, especially when the imagination is a small boy's. There being no tangible evidence of my father's death, it was, for me, not a death, but a vanishing. And although this enabled me to remember him as a living, smiling, breathing person, it meant that I was not wholly reconciled to his death, and subconsciously expected him to turn up and deliver me from an unpleasant situation. My stepfather barely noticed me. The first thing he did on coming into the house was to pour himself a whiskey and soda. My mother, after inspecting the baby, did likewise. I was left to unpack and settle in my room. I was fortunate in having my own room. I was as desirous of my own privacy as much as my mother and stepfather were desirous of their own. My stepfather, a local businessman, was ready to put up with me provided I did not get in the way. And in a different way, I was ready to put up with him provided he left me alone. I was even willing that my mother should leave me alone as well. There was a big window to my room, and I opened it to the evening breeze and gazed out onto the garden, a rather unkept place where marigolds and a sort of wild blue everlasting grew rampant among the lychee trees. You were listening to Coming Home to Dehra by Ruskin Bond from The Adventures of Rusty.
We will come back with another story another day. Till then, don't forget the address. It's 21 South Street. Goodbye.